Hi, everybody. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. First offering of the platform is a public speaking course, and it's called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that is teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Stephanie Slocum. She is a professional engineer and the founder of Engineers Rising. She's also the author of the book She Engineers, Outsmart Bias, Unlock Your Potential, and Create the Engineering Career of Your Dreams. It's quite the title. She started her career in structural engineering, and now she helps female engineers create a path to the career and life they deserve. I'm interested to learn more about her transition from employee to self-employed, her book, and of course, Engineers Rising. Welcome to Teach the Geek interview, Stephanie.
Thanks for having me, Neil.
Thanks. So first question, though, I mentioned that you started off in structural engineering. Where did your interest in structural engineering come from?
Oh, wow, that's a good question, and there's a story there. So I was fortunate. I grew up with parents that my dad was a chemist. My mom majored in microbiology in college. So for me, like the science fields were always very much encouraged as a possible route to go. So when I went to college, though, I picked biochemistry as my major, but the first chemistry class I took, I bombed. It was a struggle to get through it. I was very happy with my C, but it was also boring at the same time, which is like the worst of both worlds, right? You're in this class and you're like, this is hard and this is really boring.
Right.
So I changed majors a couple of times. I did like I said, biochemistry. I started there. I thought about doing computer engineering for one semester until I fell asleep in my C++ class. That was like the intro at the time. I thought about engineering, but like just nothing like floated my boat. And then one day I was playing tennis. I'm a big tennis player with a friend, and he was an engineer, but he brought this building model with him because he came straight from his last class. And I looked at this model and I'm like, what engineering major do you get to build models and do the engineering stuff? Architectural engineering. So that was my major, and it kind of took off from there. It was one of those things that, like, once I found where I was supposed to go, all of a sudden my grades got better, and everything kind of all gelled together from my searching around.
I can definitely relate to falling asleep in computer programming class. I I didn't even fall asleep once. It was basically an everyday occurrence. And I'm surprised I was able to get through that class. It was a first year class too, so it was a mandatory class to take. You know, one of those first year. I think it was C++ as well. If you put C++ in front of me now, I wouldn't know what the hell to do actually. So
Not at all.
yeah. So I mentioned in the intro that you started a business called Engineers Rising, but you worked in structural engineering for a number of years. What gave you the motivation to stop doing that and go full time in your business?
Great question. So, as you said, I worked as a structural engineer for about 15 years, working on large commercial building projects. So to kind of put that in perspective, if you go to universities, kind of those sorts of large buildings. So we're talking, $100 million projects and up sorts of projects. And I like enjoyed the technical part of it. I love the coordination and the meeting with all the different players and all the different engineers and all the different clients and figuring out how to solve all those problems. What I noticed along my path in my career, though, was that, first of all, there were not a lot of female engineers. A lot of my classmates in college, in this case, we had about 40% women in my major the year I graduated. But my classmates had generally dropped out of the industry and gone on different paths. I could count on one hand the number of my peers that had like stayed into that level. And I had noticed along my career path that there were these interesting, we'll call them that for now, experiences I had had related to me being a female. that like my male colleagues just didn't understand. I couldn't figure out why why things would happen to me that never happened to them. So let me give you a quick example. A couple years ago, one of the guys in the office comes back from a construction site. So I'm in architectural engineering, building structures, and he's like, "You guys are not going to believe what happened to me yesterday." Apparently, he went out for the site visit, and the drywall contractor, one of the guys like came over and like gave him a big bear hug and picked his feet up off the ground while he was on the construction site. And they were all, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened." And I looked at them and I just started laughing, because for me, like every time I go to a networking event, for example, I have people try, and usually men, trying to give me, like they'll give all the men in the group a handshake and they'll try and give me a hug. I'm not a hugger, so I usually now just put my hand out first so that doesn't happen. But things like that, little things that just add up over time, I noticed happening. What I also found was there seemed to be a lot of this idea that we are in 2000 whatever at this point, and we're just trying to be the best engineer we can be. Gender bias is not an issue, like that doesn't exist. There seemed to be a lot of denial about that. Even for senior female leaders would say, "Oh, like that didn't have any bearing on my career." But that wasn't my experience. And so as I was going along, since I was often the only woman in some of these meetings, I've been fortunate enough to have female peers and bosses, at parts in my career. I had to figure out how to navigate some of this stuff by myself. And so when I figured it out, I was like, we need to share this knowledge with other people who are in this same situation. There was a study done last year that said 40% of women in engineering and tech are what they call onlys, meaning they are the only woman on their team or in the room. And when that happens, they're much more likely to drop out of the field, experience all like the microaggressions, and they have a really rough time of it. And I thought to myself, okay, like if I have knowledge that can be shared that could help even one other woman out there who is starting her career in my situation and wondering what to do, then I should write the book. So I wrote the book. And then after that, I started, at this point, I was still working, more than full-time hours in my engineering career. And I started getting asked to come do public speaking, come speak to different groups, both men and women, young professionals, some women in engineering groups. And so I started taking vacation days to go do that. I remember the first time I got paid to speak, I flew to Los Angeles to speak before a women in engineering group. And so I quickly realized that my kind of dual career going on was not going to be sustainable. And so I thought to myself, okay, like where do I see myself long term? How can I have the most impact I can possibly have on the world and on my industry? And for me, it was taking what I had done with the book and helping to teach other women how to do, what I had done and how to figure out how to navigate this field that is very much male dominated. So last summer, the last day of June, I resigned from my engineering job to focus full time on this. So I call myself the very atypical entrepreneur. I never had any intention of starting a company. Like I wasn't one of those people that's like, I know this is my path from the beginning. For me, it was more, how do I have the biggest impact on the industry? And that's what I should go do. So that's what I did.
Excellent. I was just thinking about what you said about going to networking events and people trying to hug you. I just remember thinking, even to myself, I'm not a hugger either. And I don't think I've ever initiated a hug in my life. Every hug that's ever happened to me is someone else, going in for it. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess we're doing this.
Then you get like the, hug, awkward dodge thing. Yeah, I've done all of that.
Yeah. Get the side hug going on, or the hug where you kind of hug, but your ass is out, kind of, so you're not really fully in. Yeah, I know all them hugs.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned that you wrote this book, and I'm sure the people that you're trying. Well, obviously you're trying to target female engineers, but what are the takeaways that you hope that the female engineers get from your book?
Okay, the number one takeaway is that you are not alone in experiencing these things, and you are not overreacting. You are not misinterpreting what's going on. You are not being emotional. I mean, how many of us have been told that at some point in our careers? Um, that, these things are not in your mind, and it's a fact of life of being a female engineer that you're going to experience them. So I take the approach of, yes, we have all these things going on, and there are a lot of really good people out there working on kind of the diversity and inclusion initiatives from the corporate culture standpoint. But if you are a female in that moment where you are the only one and you need to stand up for yourself, advocate for yourself, whatever that is, here are some things you can actually do to help yourself right there and now. Because I went looking for a resource like this before I wrote the book. I'm like, surely there are things out there that would help uh, women in engineering help themselves. I couldn't find anything. So that was a huge impetus for how I wrote the book. And I think one of the things I've seen even through my coaching program is having that community of people around you that look like you, that have had some of the same experiences. That in a lot of cases gives you the confidence to know, okay, I'm experiencing these, but I can overcome them. Or if you can't go through them, go around them or find another way.
I went on your website and I noticed that you have a virtual program, and you also just mentioned that you have a coaching program. Are those two things one and the same?
Yes and no. So I know how about that for a non-answer? The virtual program is set up as a group coaching program. So we have um, an online program to go to. It's you watch a short video and then you implement immediately because engineers, we are busy, we don't have a lot of time, and the whole point is to get you things that you can do to change your career immediately. I also have a one-on-one coaching program. So my predominant audience, my predominant clients are female engineers, but I also often talk to minority men who also need help. So typically they'll go the one-on-one coaching route. I also have some female engineers in that route, especially if it's more convenient for them for time. But I do offer
both. So with your coaching, what kind of things do you coach your clients on?
A number of things. So students will come to me. Sometimes they just want help looking for a job. I have one student right now. She noticed actually during the interview process, she is an international student. She noticed during the interview process that she was getting some pointed questions related to um, gender. She was asked questions about, you know, if she was married, which in the United States, you can't actually ask that question. But she was struggling with, okay, I'm getting these questions. How do I deal with that? And moreover, how do I, make sure I'm looking for companies that are going to value what I bring instead of, for example, automatically assuming that as the one female engineer there, you're not as technically competent, which statistics have proved over and over again that that is a thought, whether we admit that we have that thought or not. So that's one example. Uh, the thing I help most of my clients with are things related to mid-career transitions. So women who have been in the field for a couple of years, they want to make a transition from technical to management. They want to consider starting a family, and they just don't know how that's going to fit into what they're doing at work currently. Women who kind of want to negotiate something be it a raise or a promotion, or even just like working part-time flex hours. Um, I will help them work through all that and craft and script the discussions they'll have. I'll help them through um, that part. And then the other thing I've had is women who want to re-enter engineering. So they took a break for whatever reason. It could be kids. It could be that they went, for example, into government and they want to get back into private practice. And I help them, figure out how to do that, help them with the job hunt, help them answer the question, why is this gap on your resume, and, take the skills they have and kind of craft them for the job.
Well, okay, that's pretty interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that could use that kind of help. And I'm guessing, all the things that you advise on, these are all things that you've experienced yourself. So you're basically just telling them, this is what I did, and hopefully, well, if it worked for me, then it'll likely work for you as well.
Yeah, I draw on a lot of my experience, but I also draw on a lot of the research out there related to best practices, essentially. I have 3 young kids. My oldest is currently 10, and I had all 3 of them while I was working as an engineer. I was working at a firm that had, good support for the work-life balance things. But on the same token, I was the first woman there to ever take maternity leave while employed at this particular company. And there wasn't a policy. It was a small company. So, navigating through that, like, how do you even start the conversation? And then what do you do to, kind of make sure you can easily transition out and easily transition back in when you want to come back? How do you do that? All of that I went through myself, so I completely understand. The same way with kind of the mid-career transitions in terms of how do you figure out what you want? Because a lot of clients will come to me and they're like, I feel like I'm stuck. I feel like I've hit a ceiling. My career has stagnated, but I have no idea what I want to do other than I'm stuck and I don't like what I'm doing right now. So the first thing we always take all the clients one-on-one coaching or group coaching through is figuring that out for yourself, figuring out where you want to go, your strengths, your interests, and crafting out a plan to do that before we go any farther. Because we all know, like, if you hopped in the car and attempted to drive from New York to Seattle without a map or GPS or anything like that, you just got in the car and started driving, you're likely to end up in Mexico or Canada instead of Seattle where you wanted to go. But if you have a map, you're much more likely to get there.
For sure. So I was also just on your website looking around, and I see that you do a couple of signature talks. So obviously, public speaking is part of your brand, and because you wrote a book, I'm sure you went around speaking about your book as well. So, if in terms of public speaking, has it been something that you've always been good at? And if not, what have you done to become better at it?
I love this question because absolutely not. No, I was not any good at public speaking. Very early in my career, I even had trouble just speaking up in a group of people, like in a meeting. I am definitely an introvert. My husband gives me a hard time about this, but I'm definitely the person that you hit Friday night. I want to sit on the couch and curl up with the book. Um, I love having like individual discussions with people and hearing their stories, but I don't necessarily want to go out to like a party or allow a large group of people. I kind of came to public speaking a bit later in my engineering career. So I had to give presentations in college. That was like a required part of some of my classes. But then about 10 years passed before I had to give another presentation. The very first one I gave was actually at a conference in front of a group of peers, and it was some work that a committee I had volunteered for. had kind of helped me compile. But I was the one who put together the presentation and did all that. And I literally remember standing before this presentation. And fortunately, it was short. It was only going to be 20 minutes long. And my hand was literally like shaking. Like I was physically shaking. I was so nervous about giving this presentation. And it went fine. Like I don't think it was terrible, but it certainly wasn't the best presentation I ever gave. But what I found was like that very first one I did gave me enough confidence to do another one. And that gave me enough confidence to do another one. And so I took these kind of very small baby steps. And it also like gave me confidence to like start going to networking events, which like mentally I knew this was an important thing to do, but it was super uncomfortable. I didn't want to do it. And I had no clue how to like start up a random conversation with a stranger in a group of people. I didn't know how to do that. So like I said, I took those baby steps, and now I've done it so much. I've basically practiced. I've put in my mat time. I've practiced so much at doing this that now when I get up to talk, yes, I'm still nervous, but I like to think of the nervousness as, okay, excitement feels about the same way. So let's channel this and use it to bring energy to my talk.
So is that the way that you handle your nervousness? You try to think of it as excitement instead?
Yeah, because for me, like those butterflies in my stomach that I get are like the feelings are really, really similar. I'm happy to say I don't like physically shake anymore before I, go to talk to groups. But yeah, that has been extremely helpful to me.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about nervousness, nervousness is not something to be avoided because you can't. At least if you care about what you're talking about. I'm a firm believer that if you get nervous when you actually care about what you're talking about. If you didn't care, you wouldn't get nervous at all. So the fact that you're nervous and at least you were shaking at first, but at least you've been able to control that, it just shows that you're very passionate and just care about the topic that you're speaking on. So it's normal. So when it comes to doing public speaking, do you have any kind of process that you do to prepare your presentations, or is it kind of customizable to whatever presentation is you're doing?
So yes, I have a process, and it's somewhat customizable, but I go through a similar process for each presentation now. The very first thing I always do is I need to know who my audience is, and very specifically who my audience is. So I just gave the example about a conference. Sometimes when you go to conferences, you'll be in this room and you'll have academics, you'll have professionals, you'll have managers, you'll have young professionals. And if you try and cater your presentation to all of them, your presentation is probably going to be pretty terrible. So I always start with who is the primary audience I want to reach, and how do I tailor this presentation to speak directly to them. So that's the first thing I do, and I'm often surprised at how many questions I need to ask either myself or the person that's inviting me to speak to really drill down on, like, can I imagine the person I'm speaking to in my head? I want to be able to say this presentation is talking to this specific person. So let's say, they're in their 30s, they're a manager, and they have women they're managing, and they don't know what to do because those women aren't speaking up. They're not, being proactive. What does he do? Or what does she do? So like, that's one example of, how I imagine that in my head. The next thing I do is I look at all the information, because I feel like as engineers, we have the curse of knowledge. A lot of times we know so much about a subject, and then we try to cram it all in our slides with all these bullet points and no pictures and no stories. And then, I've seen engineers read their slides. I've seen, I saw a 45-minute presentation at one of the conferences I went to this year, which literally had like a title, 6 bullet points that were too hard to read from the back of the room, and nothing else on the slide. that presentation was terrible. And I actually like snuck out early to go find a better one. So that's the second thing.
Oh.
You want to make sure the information in your presentation is specifically tailored to what you want them to get out of it, and there's no extra information. So you don't need to download your entire brain. The point of the presentation is to reach your audience, not demonstrate how smart you are. And I always get wry smiles when I mention that to like folks in the academic world, because in my experience, a lot of times that group tends to be the largest culprits.
Hell yeah.
I have great respect for academics, but yeah, this is not a match to see like how much of my research can I cram on a slide.
Well, you know what? When it comes to the academics, not to interrupt you, but I think for a lot of them, you know, especially if you're a grad student or you're a postdoc and you're looking to stay in academia, you go to those conferences to be able to essentially show that you're smart, and especially the people in the audience. So if you want to go on to another postdoc, or you want to go on, or to go to a postdoc, or to get your first tenure track position, you're really trying to prove that you're as smarter than the other people that are applying for, you know, the various jobs. So I think with them, I guess their motivation to why they're speaking in the first place might be different than someone like yourself. You want to impart, you know, information in a way that people can understand, but perhaps the postdoc or the grad student looking for a tenure track position, they're trying to look intelligent so they can get their next position.
Got it. And I think that goes back to the whole point about knowing your audience. If your presentation is a faculty member, if you're giving your presentation to someone and who you're trying to target is that expert in the field who already knows a ton about the subject, you can do a deep dive into it. However, if you are in like a mixed audience that's supposed to be kind of a more professional setting that doesn't know about that, it's a different kind of presentation you would put together.
For sure.
Okay, let me finish the rest of my process here.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the next one, and I will say like this one I did not learn until I started doing a lot of speaking, but it is truly the secret sauce, and anyone watching this should start doing this immediately. Incorporate stories into your presentations. So as the human race, from a very long time ago, initially a lot of stories were passed down by hearing them and talking, and our brains are still wired to remember stories much more than they will remember statistics. So let me give you a very quick example. Let's say you are a computer engineer. I know I bashed C++ earlier, but we'll go with this example. Let's say you were a computer engineer and you are presenting something about a feature of a software program that you have been working on an update for. You could present that to your boss and just say like X number of users statistic are experiencing this problem. Or you could say, let me tell you a story about one of our biggest clients and this particular person and what happened when they experienced this bug in the program and how that made them look bad for their clients, or lost them another client or something like that. If you tell the story, that brings it home much more than just spewing out statistics. And I'm not saying you don't have to do that on every slide, but I would highly encourage, presentations land better if, for example, you start with a story. It could be as basic as, here's how I came to be here today, presenting, or why you should, like a story that leads into, here's why you should care about watching the rest of my presentation.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything you said. Stories are certainly important, and knowing your audience is extremely important too, because that's going to be the reason they listen. And you're, just like the example I gave of academics presenting to other academics, they want to show that they're intelligent to potentially get their next gig. And so their motivation for talking is going to be a lot different than, someone, as I said earlier, someone like yourself who's trying to impart knowledge to perhaps a female engineering audience. They're not going to be interested in perhaps all the stats and the data and the facts and all that. You got to present it in a more palatable way. So I fully agree with what you said. So this is essentially the end. Thanks for coming, for being on the channel, Stephanie. Is there anything else that you'd like others to know about what you're doing?
Yeah, I have to answer this quickly. You can, as I said before, like I run a virtual program. So if you are a female engineer watching this, and you're like at this point in your career where you're stuck, maybe you don't have that community around you, please come check out my website and contact me. That's www.engineersrising.com. You can also pick up a free chapter of She Engineers. If you come to that site, there's a link and you can check that out. As Neil said, we have a virtual program, and we are also planning to run a virtual summit in October. The dates are to be determined, but October of this year, where we're interviewing a whole lot of female engineers to help kind of get the word out in terms of like, here are things you need to do to be successful in your career. Here's some career paths you can take. Here's examples of female entrepreneurs. Here's how you deal with the daily stressors of being an engineer. And that's completely free. So if you want to learn more about any of those things, please come to my website, www.engineersrising.com. I am also on Facebook, on LinkedIn, I am Stephanie Slocum PE, and on Instagram, I am Steph the Engineer.
Wonderful. Again, my name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering is Teach the Geek to Speak. It's an online public speaking course. And to learn more about that, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day. Bye, Stephanie.
Bye, Neil.